Get started in a second as soon as the screen comes up. One thing I will say is I'm not a huge fan of standing behind a podium, but because this is going live stream, I have to stand behind the podium and behave. So welcome everybody. If you all want to sit and try and squeeze in the middle where everybody this way you can see, there's lots of great stuff, so on and so forth. Yeah, okay. I think we might need, yeah, no, it's a little too bright. Yeah, that's okay. Perfect. All right. So as she mentioned, my name is James Mendolia. Good. My name is James Mendolia, and I'm super happy that I was invited to do this presentation at Pratt. I'll give you a little bit of my background as we go through this presentation, and hopefully the mic behaves. So I'll give you a little bit of my background as we go through the presentation, but what I wanted to speak to you about is design responsibility and a new generation of eco-smart textiles. So one of the things that was super interesting this morning, I was listening to one of the presentations, and it was Deb Johnson, and we just finished having a discussion, Deb Johnson from BK Accelerator, and the questions that we hear, whether they're from students or whether they're from participants that are in the industry, is how do you get started as a designer? This all seems overwhelming. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to absorb. And one of the things that Deb and I were just talking about is, so this doesn't seem overwhelming to you. Think about it this way. If you're a designer and if you're into fashion, one of the things that you have to think about is always, in terms of your design, is being true to your aesthetic. In terms of fabric sourcing, and material sourcing, it's the same thing. Think about what you're passionate about, whether it's water, whether it's chemicals, and that's the thing that you want to stick to when you're thinking about sourcing. So in other words, if you were doing children's wear and you were designing for children's wear and you were trying to reduce the amount of chemicals in the fabrics, then that is the thing that you need to be passionate about and move full speed ahead. The reality is, if that's the case, you're then going to use more water consumption. So there's a little bit of a complex problem at hand, but I also want you to remember that this is an industry that's been around for centuries, and it's just now that we're starting to see these conversations happen on a broader basis. So don't let this overwhelm you. The goal is for you to walk away and sort of activate change in some form or another. And that's my word of advice for you at the moment. So really looking at this is something that's new and exciting. When I went to school, you know, like 40, 50 years ago, these conversations didn't even exist at the university level. They were in certain colleges, but not really in fashion schools. So to me, it's super interesting to be able to come to the schools, visit the schools, and really talk about design responsibility and what it is, what it does, and it's going to mean something different to each of you. So I have a little bit of a little logo mania there, and the reason I have that on the board is not to say, look at all the places that I've been, look where I've worked. It's really about letting you know that my background has been in academia, but it's also been in the fashion industry. And I went to a presentation about 7-8 months ago, and it was Andrew Ola, who is with the Kingpins, and he's been like the denim guru for years. And the conversation that he had during this conference was the fact that when we started doing this in the late 70s, early 80s, he was really into denim and doing all sorts of washes and all sorts of finishes and distressing, not realizing the impact on the environment. It's only now that we're starting to see that. So again, to me, the goal is not pointing the blame, look at what you've done, look at what you've done, but it's about this joint effort to make some change. And as many of you may or may not know, the fashion industry is one of the biggest offenders in the human rights violations and environmental violations. So it's something to take seriously. And the other reason I have the logos on there is because one of the things that I'm passionate about is travel. That's my true passion. Sorry for all of you fashionistas out there. But the fashion industry has allowed me to travel throughout the world, and it's been super interesting to be able to see all of these different countries, and it's also been interesting to see some of the devastation that happens from the textile manufacturing, apparel manufacturing. Another thing that's kind of exciting, two little bits, is in the fall, FIT is launching the MFA in fashion design, and I actually wrote 2 courses, one based on fit and one based on sourcing. So I'll be teaching in the MFA program at fashion design at FIT. And the other thing, which is really exciting for those of you that are Pratt fashion students, is your chairperson, Jennifer Minetti, and Emily Matter had just asked me to write a course for special topics, which we're going to launch in the fall. And the course is about design responsibility. So I think they were sending out an email blast either on Friday, or if not, you'll probably get it on Monday. But it's Thursday night from 5 to 7:50. It's a 15-week course. And I really do hope I see a lot of you taking this course as a special topic. At some point, I would like to not see these courses be a special topic. These are things that should be sort of threaded throughout the DNA of fashion design schools, et cetera, et cetera. Not just design, but fashion design, fashion merchandising, marketing, production, just to really get you to start thinking in a critical way and going beyond the design cycle, but looking at the afterlife cycle, and then also looking at optimizing your sourcing opportunities using alternatives to conventional materials, which is what we're going to talk about. And I have a tiny bit of them to be able to show you. So one of the things that I've been on this crusade about is really looking at design thinking and design responsibility. And when I walked in earlier, one of the participants that were here said, how did you get involved in this? Like, what made you, where did this crusade start? My background is in merchandising, product development, and really looking at the business, the health of the business of any company and being able to do sourcing. So as a merchandiser, one of the things that I always had to do was fabric research and development. And as I travel to the trade shows, and those of you that are students, you learn about Première Vision in your classes. As I started to travel to the trade shows, I started to see textile mills doing these things that I thought they were interesting. So it had nothing to do with what the brand that I was working for needed, but I started to see fabrics that were made from crab, fabrics that were made from corn, fabrics that were made from milk, and a whole host of other things. And I started to do research on them on my own, personally. I just thought it was super interesting, and I kept thinking, how could that be? How do you make something that we're going to wear from crab pulp or waste or something of that nature? So as I started to gather that research, one of the things that I wanted to be able to do, at this point I was working at Parsons, and one of the things that I wanted to do was I worked closely with the chairperson of our department in the School of Fashion, and I kept saying, I think something is here that's really important, and we're at the cusp of it. And this is going back about, I'd say, between 12 and 14 years ago. And I showed her the fabrics that I was finding, and she said, they are really interesting. And the funny thing was, the fabrics that were made out of milk and crab, she picked them up and smelled them to see if they smelled like milk or crab. So I said, that's exactly why I want to do something with this, because I want to be able to introduce fashion business and fashion design students to these fabrics and let them understand that not only do we need to look at responsible sourcing opportunities, but we really also need to look at sort of the communication that goes with them. And with that, she said, what do you want to do? I said, let's start off doing an independent study. And the first semester, I had 1 student, then 2. Then after about 3 or 4 semesters, I started having 10 and 15. It was impossible to do an independent study. And I developed Parsons, one of the first classes for Parsons School of Fashion, which was at that time called Eco-Fashion Sustainable Solutions, which is probably, you could tell by the title, about 13 or 14 years ago. And it was the first course within the School of Fashion that spoke to design responsibility. And what ended up happening is it was offered every semester, every spring semester. And I'm no longer at Parsons. I'm pursuing a bunch of other opportunities, which you'll learn about. But one of the things that I've been doing is going to universities in the United States, Mexico, in Europe, and in Asia, speaking to business companies and talking about looking at the supply chain. So not just the design development process, but also the afterlife cycle, so that when you are designing, you're thinking beyond just about getting a product into the store. As whether you're a student, whether you're an emerging fashion professional, one of the things that I always challenge you to do is look at everything that you're doing, not in a silo, but if you are working for a fashion company, we're now at a point where I'm seeing fashion design, working with fashion merchandising closely, and then also working with the chief financial officers so that they're able to look at the supply chain and figure out where are we wasting and spending money so that we can do an assessment of these new alternative materials that are out there, which ones will be profitable and which ones will not. And one of the things that becomes really interesting is looking at the supply chain, and in many cases you'll see that these materials, when they're put into the design collection, they balance out because you take out an expense from another area of the design development process. So really looking at eco-smart developments, design thinking, exploring the possibilities. So whether you're in industry, whether you're a design student, you already identified yourself as a fashion student, so I know that. You should be looking at the fiber companies, because what I'm noticing now are the fiber companies that I was following 5 years ago are making these fabrics. So looking at the fiber companies to see what the developments are and how you go about monitoring them until they come to fruition. This is just a little kind of quote that I have on there. It's, you know, we know sustainability is no longer a new conversation. The term sustainability is really even becoming old. So, you know, we try and use eco-smart because it is really about smart choices, but it's no longer a new conversation, but a new generation of eco-smart textiles that provides significant reductions in water, energy, and CO2 is. So remember, as a designer, your goal is to figure out what you're passionate about. If you're doing children's wear and you want to reduce chemicals, etc. There's not a magic wand, I'll say that throughout the entire semester, that's going to wipe the slate clean. This is a tough industry, and making small steps in the right directions is sometimes not a bad thing, and doing it from a corporate perspective. So I've also had students that were interns and say to me, you know, if I'm an intern, how do I go about telling someone that I know something better than them? And I say, you don't do it in an aggressive way or an assertive way. The goal is during a design meeting, your design and merchandising team are showing you fabrics, and of course you're saying those are beautiful, to be diplomatic. But then you say, you know, I also saw these amazing fabrics that were made from X, Y, and Z. And that's a great way to introduce it, because keep in mind, if your boss or your manager is in their 30s, 40s, or early 50s, there's a chance they don't even know these things exist. So you don't want to go in to take over, but keeping profit and price in mind, these are things that are going to be important. And you know, all of my research recently has been, in fact, related to textile production, to textile technology, and looking at these alternatives, which to me are interesting. You know, we've all seen cotton. So just to give you a little bit of a background, you know, there have been many approaches to sustainability, and they've been going on now for the last decade. And these are some things that, you know, you could look at them and think of the shifts in lifestyle, do-it-yourself things that are happening. We're seeing these movements in Brooklyn and Williamsburg, in areas of Queens, et cetera. There's all this awareness going on. But keep in mind, the fashion industry is a massive, massive industry. You have companies like H&M and Zara and some of the other big ones where they'll buy 1 million yards of fabric just for one program. So while these things are great, my goal is to really embrace the fashion industry and get them to generate change, because that's what's going to make a significant difference for sure. So where are we today? I definitely think we're moving in the right direction. We're seeing lots of amazing things happening, and keep in mind I'm probably 2-3 times older than you guys, so I've seen it from the 60s through the 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way. And what's interesting to me, having been born and raised in New York City, is this is almost a return to the way things were, which is kind of amazing, but we'll let the hipsters think they invented it, which is fine. So we're moving in the right direction, but the one thing that I have to say is that action is super slow, and there's a number of reasons why action is really on the slow side. And we tried to pinpoint some of those reasons. So the two things, before we get into the obstacles, the two things that are interesting is I'm really starting to see the market, the fashion industry, they know they need to do something, they just don't know how and what they need to do. So that is becoming the challenge for me, is trying to figure out how do we go about sort of communicating this message to them. The other thing that's of interest is we're starting to see fashion companies, and I could use an example like Ralph Lauren, where Ralph Lauren will have their design team and then their sustainable team. While I think that's a step in the right direction, I don't understand why they're separate. And the two should really be infused together. And that way of thinking is what's going to cause a cultural shift and then a shift in business practices as well. So it shouldn't be separate, but at least the conversations are starting, and that to me is pretty amazing. Again, considering these conversations didn't exist on a university level at all when I went to school. And then a lot of the consumers and the media are seeing that there's some viability to looking at eco-friendly and looking at sustainability and how that this all needs to happen. And it's interesting that it's happening in food and it's happening in other industries, but fashion is really slow to embrace it. And you know, we can have a 20-week course on why they're slow to embrace it. But those are some of my opinions. Those are some things that are based on fact. And in terms of the obstacles, these are things that we put together because I find them really interesting. In terms of the suppliers, we're talking about those vendors, the yarn spinners, the weavers, the knitters. They do what they do, and they do it really well, and they're not taking into consideration the commercial viability of these particular products. I've been to numerous mills in Italy and throughout the region, not just in one region, but throughout the region. And you go to the mill, and it's this high-tech mill, and they have solar panels, really amazing. And you say, you know, these products are pretty unique, and they just think, why? But they're not getting the viability and the commercial value to these products. So that's shifting a little bit. The designers, many of the designers are having a difficult time identifying these products. That also is changing. You'll see in a few minutes, my partner, Giuseppe Battoni, is working with PV to create an easier way for designers to identify these fabrics. And obviously, I'm going out to schools, speaking to emerging designers. You know, you're the first line of defense. You get to the companies and you're already armed with this knowledge. That to me is pretty fantastic. And then the average consumers really, they're not sure about equating value, a little bit more price with the fact that it's sustainable or eco-smart, etc. The thing is, that needs to be a shift in culture in terms of consumer thinking, and it takes a while. How do we know that? It took a long time for them to figure out that organic food that they consume is better for them. You're consuming it. So why not think about textiles? And if you think about them, we're surrounded by them from the minute you wake up till the minute you go to sleep. And even when you go to sleep, unless you're sleeping on a bed with no sheets, there's textile surrounding you. So it's really about time the fashion industry and the consumers make the connection between fashion and well-being. And the last one is the communication doesn't deliver a clear message regarding what responsible design is. And proof of that is we're still hearing antiquated terms like, you know, green and recycle. The average consumer now thinks, okay, if it's recycled, why wouldn't it be cheaper? Because it's used. So the same way recycle took a while to really be able to understand, this is now again trying to get a shift in culture so that people understand the value of these products and the story behind it. I think we're at a point in the fashion industry where everybody loves hearing a story. So if I go up to you and say, that's a really beautiful blouse, and there's a story behind it, you're going to tell me that story. So those are some of the things that I think are interesting. And in terms of the communication, we'll talk about what I'm doing in a second, but one of our lines of defense has been working with the schools and working with the designers. We actually had a fast fashion retailer come to us and say, you know, instead of dealing with our design team, what we'd love for you to do is deal with our regional sales managers. And we thought, okay, it sounds interesting. Why is that? Well, if we give them the information and they arm the sales team is the first connection to the customer. So that's a great way to be able to make someone understand what makes this product special. It might not be more expensive, but why it's maybe 50 cents more, $1 more. And that's how you embrace, by really looking at that change in a big way. So what is CLASS? They're a Milan-based eco-hub, stands for Creativity, Lifestyle, and Sustainable Synergy. This is the 10th anniversary in September. They've been around since 2007, leading the way, pioneering, so on and so forth. And the goal is to be able to look at smart values and really look at those eco values that equal a smart business. And if you're a designer, as soon as you go up to somebody and say smart business, they're thinking money, they're thinking profit. That's always how you're going to get them. Remembering this industry's been around for centuries and it's constantly evolving. So looking at new disruptive business models, we're sick of hearing the word disruptive too, but I think you understand, looking at new ways of doing business and new ways of design thinking. So eco values equal a smart business. And one of the things that's set up in Milan is it's become a global information point. So we have the headquarters in Milan. There's a library with eco materials, eco smart materials. And the goal is, so we're not a mill, we're not a spinner. We work with weavers, knitters, and spinners, and leather companies too, to find an extract of their collection that is pretty much put together in this library, and it's almost like a safety zone. And that safety zone means if a designer comes in and is looking for fabrics that use less water, here's a group of them. Or if they're looking for leather that's washable or something, here's a group of them. So keep this in mind. And then the other thing I want you to keep in mind is what your takeaway is. You may not remember my name ever, but your job when you get out into the industry or as an emerging designer or as an established designer is really to activate some sort of change. Be the one to buck the system, be the one that's going to create something new and do something different. Is it harder? Sometimes it is. That doesn't mean that it's not worth it. So, you know, your takeaway should be to activate change. I think it was September 2016, one of the universities in Mexico, they do a design symposium, and they invite people in from graphic design, interior design, product design, you get it, the design disciplines. And one of the faculty wanted me to come in and speak, and the dean had concerns, and the dean's concerns were not everybody in the audience cares about fashion. And I ended up speaking to him to convince him why this was important. So not everybody in the audience is going to be a fashion major. Not everybody in the audience is going to care about fashion, but everybody in the audience is going to be wearing clothes, and everybody in the audience will have bought something within the last year, or 90% of them would. So I started off my presentation really by looking at this slide, which is, what is your garment going to be doing 20 years from now? And that's something every designer, every student, every customer should be thinking about. What is going to happen with this garment after I'm done with it? And we know that we have a huge problem like never before, and that problem is fast fashion and the pricing that's tied to fast fashion. You know, you can actually, I think the fashion industry is probably the only industry or one of the few industries that hasn't been hit hard by inflation. You can buy a shirt now that's cheaper than it was a similar compatible shirt in 1985. There aren't many companies that could say that. So the point is, we're buying more, we're consuming more. These are things that are really have a huge impact. So think about that. What is your garment going to be doing 20 years from today? And that should lead the crusade to activate change and make sure you're thinking beyond just creating something pretty, but really doing something that's responsible. So it's a massive Earth image. So here's some things to think about in terms of emerging designers. By 2050, hopefully I'll be retired by then, but by 2050, we're being told the population is going to increase 33%, energy demands are going to increase by 50%, and water dependency will increase by 30%. The reality is, I don't know about all of you, but I've been on the trains. I don't know that I need 33% more people. And most of this is migrating back toward the city, toward the urban areas. Energy demands, water dependency, why are those important? For those of you that know or don't know, the fashion industry, textile manufacturing, garment manufacturing, they're incredibly thirsty industries and they thrive on energy. So the more energy that's used, the bigger the problem there is. So what are the key issues? And before you get too discouraged, there's going to be some good stuff at the end. So don't what are the key issues related to textiles? So we're going to talk about exclusively the textiles. That looks like a beautiful color that I'd want in my spring 2018 collection, but those are toxic chemicals on the top of a water, and it's just, we don't want to see that. So in terms of water, this industry, overuse, abuse, contamination, and it's irreversible. I don't know if any of your faculty or if any of you have gone on Google Earth and looked at the Pearl River in China. And the Pearl River sort of has denim manufacturers on both sides. And you can see the river turning blue, indigo blue from Google Earth. Those are things that you and I will not see return back to the way they were in any of our lifetimes. So water overuse and abuse and contamination, and this is an abbreviated version of a longer presentation, so I'm not going to go into chemicals and all of that. But keep in mind, you can imagine you wouldn't want to go swimming in any of that, and nor should we do that in any other part of the world. This was an image I actually saw in the New York Times, and there was a whole series of them. And it was really quite disturbing because it really ties into the chemicals, the pesticides, toxic chemicals, and all sorts of things that are just, we know are not good for us. And I looked at the background and thought, how horrible that I'm sitting here in New York City and yet we're producing stuff in another part of the world. And when we're done, we're leaving it looking like that. That is not very responsible. That is not very ethical, moral, or anything else. So really looking at the chemicals used and the different fabrications and the different types of chemicals that are used. And the mills now are being pressured to be totally transparent. And you all know what transparency is? You're all shaking your heads yes, right? Good. So when we talked about transparency 10 years ago, if I would have asked that question, someone would have said, you mean a sheer fabric? But again, here's where the shift in culture comes in. We now know that transparency equals honesty, and it equals sort of respectability. So that shift in culture, though it may take a while, it does happen. And it's easier for it to happen as you enter the industry, so on and so forth. But this was something that was really quite disturbing to me. And then the other, excuse me? It was a denim, you can see by the blue, it was a denim company, yeah. So and there were other images where they had like blue stained hands, and it's just, it's kind of awful. Yeah, no, exactly. So exactly, this was just an area that's what, and it's not just one factory, it's a problem that is running rampant at this point. Yeah. There's a new documentary called The River, and it talks about how the denim factory, all of the pollution, the waste of ruining ecosystems and water supply, millions of people in China. So Tuesday at the BK Accelerator, and we can get you some more information on that, they are actually doing a screening. So, oh, well, then you missed it. All right, but in any event, yeah. Yeah, there are a number of them. There's The True Cost. There's really good documentaries that expose the fashion industry. Asset stripping, we know that even though you might be doing organic cotton and just any kind of crop that you're growing, all of those crops pull the nutrients out of the soil, and they use synthetic fertilizers to be able to put nutrients back into the soil. But in terms of asset stripping, really pulling out those non-renewable resources that for some reason we now think they're just infinite and they're abundant, and they're not. So it's really re-looking at, again, the supply chain to see what are the things that we're using. In terms of waste, too much is destroyed, too much is discarded. This is a problem that has been caused by fast fashion, and there's just an abundance. So I will always get someone in the audience that says, well, I'm really responsible, I donate all my clothing. And I say, okay, that theory worked 30 years ago when we weren't doing that much production. But now what ends up happening is, because of the abundance out there, it gets donated, and then three things will happen. It might get stripped down and become mattress felting or stuffing for car seats, or stuffing for stuffed animals, so on and so forth. It could go to a secondhand market. It could go to like donating, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is that we've now produced so much secondhand merchandise that when it goes to other parts of the world, like Haiti, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, the trains pull in with big barrels of clothing, sort of in those plastic straps, gets thrown to the ground. People take them, go into the secondhand market. There's such an abundance that in Haiti, the secondhand market has surpassed garment manufacturing, and now there's such an abundance there that what ends up happening is, after they're done, the clothing goes in their landfill. So just by donating it does not mean that we've eliminated the problem. And to give you a little bit of a statistic so you can maybe have a better understanding of the shifts in terms of manufacturing, in 1965, 95% of fashion that was sold at retail was manufactured right here in the United States. That went on for quite a while. As of 2010, 95% of fashion sold at retail is now manufactured offshore. So you could understand the shift in production and sort of that elimination. And once those industries disappear here, it gets harder and harder to bring them back so that they thrive. But keep this in mind. And then in terms of waste, I'll explain this image in a second, but 15% of the fabric ends up on the cutting room floor, and this is something that's been tolerated for decades. So, I mean, I can't move away from this mic, but I'm gonna give you a little bit of a rundown. So what you're seeing here is a production marker. So all of the pieces that are in blue, light blue, periwinkle, that ultimately would be, the fabric gets spread, plies this high, and the cutting room tables in some of the factories in Asia and Southeast Asia are as long as this room, probably double or triple. The fabric gets laid down, ply on top of ply, until it's this big. What you're seeing there is a marker, right? It's laid on top. Those blue pieces ultimately would get cut and then assembled into a garment and then sold. What I want you to think about and keep it in the back of your mind is, you see all this gray area? All this, right? All of that does not get used. All of that gets wasted, thrown away. If you're a factory in Italy, you actually have to pay a tax and special waste management to remove that. If you're anywhere else, it goes in the landfill. So even though we might be thinking that, we're cutting the fabric, there's still a portion of it that goes into landfill. Remember, I said before, some of the big fast fashion companies will manufacture 1 million units, and they'll buy 2 million yards of fabric. Imagine how much waste goes into the landfill. So keep that in the back of your mind, and you'll see how it all makes sense in a second. And then transport, we know that what's happening is you have capitalist exploitation, we're going offshore for inexpensive labor, and so on and so forth. Those garments have to come back some way, and it's usually by sea, not so much by air. And then the last, I think this is the last, is energy, which is wasted or overused in production. That's a factory, and that's not even the largest factory that I've ever seen. The factories are getting bigger and bigger, larger and larger, and energy is being used more and more. So what now happens is, because we have fast fashion, because we have these mega retailers, they're putting demands on these factories to be bigger and bigger as the prices go lower and lower. So you should be feeling a little discouraged. That's part of it. And now we're going to talk about I just have a teeny bit of some of the materials that are in the library that you'd be able to see. So again, you know that I did this research probably 12 years ago, and I keep running into the same people at conferences, seminars, etc. And one of them was this woman, Juicy Catoni, and she kept saying, there's got to be something we could do. There's got to be something we could do. And with that, I said, yeah, you know, one of the things that I have are students that are interested, I have faculty that are interested, industry professionals and corporations. There's a lack of a consistent sort of knowledge that's out there. And we started talking, it was like, okay, what about doing something like a new division of the company, like class education, which really is dedicated to sharing knowledge. And what we've been doing, last year we did the first one, are these eco-fashion workshops. So her question to me was, would we do them in New York? And I said, no. And she said, why not? And I said, why not? I said, because things like this are amazing, but if we do them in Italy, within close proximity to the textile mills, not only would be able to do workshops, people would be able to see everything, feel it, touch it, hands-on, so they could talk about the technologies, see it, learn it, so on and so forth. And we did our first one last summer, where it was a group of students from Parsons, FIT, University of Westminster, Domus, University of Biella, and I don't remember where else. And they came together, and that was one of the questions asked is, you know, there aren't many things like this where we can all sort of get together, because you're all out there, but how do you connect to students in other schools or other designers? So I'm glad I'm not wearing the same shirt, but there's Juicy. She actually founded class, and then we co-founded the new division, class education. So now what you're going to see, the next slide, are really eco-smart innovations and new technologies that are in place. These are things that exist. So these aren't sci-fi. These aren't things that are happening 5 or 10 years down the road. These are things that are happening now. And the first one is a product called Ecotech. So if you look on the side, look at the reductions in water, carbon emissions, and energy. They're pretty significant. And what they do, I'm going to go back to this slide. What they do is actually take they're dyed already. These are the pre-consumer clippings, the pieces in between the pattern pieces, and what they will actually do is shred those down into fiber. Then you have to add, I think it's like either 15 or 20% new fiber. And then what they end up doing is creating new yarns. And which means that because they're already pre-dyed, they're dyed, you have a really wide range of colors that are available. So think about all of the garment manufacturers, brands out there that are producing tons of things and how much waste they have. So these are stock colors. These are yarns that would be used, you know, by anybody in terms of the color. The colors obviously are going to change based on what's being produced. The thing that you'll see is that those percentages are not percentages that we created. Those are percentages that are based on a life cycle assessment by a third party, and that is based on the clippings coming from Bangladesh back to Italy to be made into New York. So if you were actually doing production closer to Italy, those percentages would go up. And it's again, it's all made in Italy. It's all completely certified, traceable. But this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning when I was having the conversation, saying, you know, all of this has to inspire creativity. If it doesn't inspire creativity, nobody's going to want to use it no matter what it saves. So, you know, this kind of does that. And these are companies that have been around for a long time. So textile engineering is in their blood. in many of the mills when I go, it's amazing that you see people that have been there for 2, 3 generations, and it's quite nice. So it's the only smart cotton yarn range. This is another product which we'll talk about New Life, but I'm going to zip forward again for a second. And if you look at the image in the top left, so I teach classes in Italy every summer, and I usually bring a group with me, and then I do these tours, etc. And at one point when the class ended, you know, usually by then you've spent 2 weeks with a group of people, it's enough. So I went by Juicy's office and I said, you know, you want to go for lunch? She said, I can't. This is years ago. I have to go to a facility up north, which is close to Torino. And she said, do you want to come? And I thought, why wouldn't I? It's like a drive along the Swiss and Italian Alps up north. It's all green. It's absolutely gorgeous. You know, you just see in beauty, beauty, and more beauty. And the point was, after about an hour and 15 minutes, we get to this one facility. And mind you, it's all farmlands, animal, just beautiful. And I walk into the back, and it looked like miles and miles and miles of plastic bottles. And I kept thinking, are they collecting these plastic bottles from all over the world? And they actually weren't. All of these plastic bottles were within an 80-mile radius of the facility. And that, trust me when I say, is just a tiny glimpse of this massive lot in the back of their facility. On top of that, I start learning about the different types of plastic bottles. So some of you better hide your plastic bottles before I point you out here. But if you look in the top right hand, you see in the right-hand corner in my hand, you see the green, the blue, there's some red pieces in there. Those bottles are hard to break down because there's just layers and layers. So those you can't really do much with them. What this company does, because they also produce the polymers for food packaging industry, what they also do is use the clear, and it's the highest quality that you can possibly get in terms of the polymers. Those polymers would get sent to filament spinners, the spinners get spun into yarn, and then there's a wide range of fabrics that are made. But what's incredibly interesting is the fact that, you know, who would have thought you could have taken, you know, waste and sort of really make it into something kind of cool. The brilliance of this particular facility is it's a mechanical process. Most recycled plastic is a chemical process. And I don't need to go into chemical process, bad, mechanical, better. You get the idea. So really kind of interesting. Now we'll go back to that slide, and what's created is a product called New Life, which again, it's a conversion. So the word plastic is completely removed from the language. Word recycled. Nobody wants to hear the word recycled anymore, or upcycled, or any of that. It needs to be a new way of communicating so that the customer is completely thrilled with what they're seeing. And what they're doing is transforming post-consumer plastic bottles. The best case scenario would be y'all weren't drinking out of your plastic bottles and there wouldn't be a problem. But since the problem is there, they're taking the plastic bottles and turning it into a fashion solution. And it's a mechanical process that I mentioned, completely made in Italy. And look at the reductions. Those are significant reductions in water, energy, and also carbon dioxide emissions. And what you're seeing there is actually some clothing from Max Mara's collection, like, I don't know, 2 seasons back. But so people are using this at all different price points. They are using this. And just to make sure we're clear, some of the key points: the bottles are from an 80-mile radius. It's a patented process that's all making it unique to Italy. Wide range of qualities, beautiful woven and knit constructions, and really able to do things that are new, interesting, etc. I have tiny bits of examples, which you'll see in a second. Then Mendolia, many of you might know this from either working in industry or from school. But Mendolia has been around for a long time. They do prints. Now, naturally, if you were working for a big design company, they would create their own print motifs on CAD, and then you would work with something like Mendolia. But if you look at the third bullet down, what's amazing here in terms of the points of excellence is in printing 100,000 meters of natural fabric, they've actually, you can save 3.2 million liters of water. And again, this is all certified by life cycle assessment. So super, super interesting. The goal is pick whatever poison is going on in the industry that you want to reduce or eliminate and be passionate about it. And yep, I know. I'm watching here. And Bax is another product which is made sort of the reuse of production waste to create this new silk products. And this was addressed by Eardom at during Fashion Week, which was a collaboration between Class, EcoAge, and Eardom. And you know, the goal is the customer looks at the dress, likes it, and wants to buy it, and it's not a whole bunch of other stuff there that inspires that compromises creativity. The last one that I have to go over before we end is really looking at a circular economy, and that's kind of eliminating waste in the short version as you're designing. And it's this product Reverso, and Reverso is woolen cashmeres that take, well, here you go, do a similar process to what we talk about. Take the pre-consumer clippings and convert it into new products. So if you look here, in terms of the life cycle assessment study, 96% reduction in carbon emissions, 89% reduction in water, and 76% reduction in energy. So we're talking about significant savings. And across the board, you have beautiful woven and knit fabric. You'll see some of that. You have yarns for contract apparel, knitwear yarns, so on and so forth. Gucci used this, and again, before you ask, you know, is it only at the designer price points? No, it's not only at the designer price point. There's a wide range of price points that this could adhere to. So Gucci used it to make their cashmere coat. I've had the cashmere coat when I've done these presentations. Usually someone tries it on, one of the guys, and the first thing they do is feel, nobody looks at the label to see, is this made from pre-consumer or anything. So it's beautiful, it has a great hand. The only thing is when Class actually worked with them in terms of communicating a message, I think their message is a little too lengthy. So it needs to be a little bit shorter, but keep in mind that customers do understand there's a water, energy, and carbon is a problem. Carbon emissions is a problem. So that's sort of it. So fast forward a little bit, and you know, what's next is one of the things that we talked about was creating a newsletter and me following around the schools and you know, trying to connect. So I always get students trying to ask me to connect to someone from LCF, et cetera. So what we're doing is we're launching a newsletter, and the newsletter is actually going to highlight what students are doing at school, because we know many of the design students are working on amazing things. So if you want to be on the newsletter mailing list, you just log on. It doesn't ask for any other information but your name, last name, and email address, and it's student-centric. So nobody's selling anything, nobody is talking about corporate anything, but it really is all about looking at what the students are doing from a wide range of universities around the globe. And this seems to be the thing that's getting some great response, because the students do want to have kind of an international community. And the other thing, if you're interested, I have Instagram, and the Instagram, the only time I use it is just for this. So you're not going to see me pictures of food and stupid things. It's just about seminars, products, things that are using. So it's a way to keep you in the loop. And if you want to connect with me via Instagram, that could be, you know, you're more than welcome. But it's just strictly business as usual. You won't see me pictures with, you know, me riding a bicycle or anything foolish. All right, so we have a short period of time. What I want to do is, there are some fabrics on the table. She's going to turn on the light, and what we're seeing is, here's the Ecotech card where you're able to see the color palette. Then these right here are the Reverso, the wool, and then also there are some fabric samples with blue light. I didn't get to talk about lensing, but that'll happen. And the other thing is, There are some natural dyes, and you can see if you look at the back of them, you can see what was dyed using gardenia, so on and so forth. There's a bunch of cards there, and so on and so forth.